right. All right, I think I'm all set. Hello everyone, happy Thursday. My name is Brittany. I'm going to give you guys a little presentation about our, about the aging foot, our foot health in general, steps that we can take to get ourselves out of foot pain, and pretty much just create a conversation about things that we don't typically talk about, especially in the fitness and health industry. We talk a lot about our muscles and being strong and mobile and everything like that, but we rarely talk about the feet. So it's very low on the, it's very low hanging fruit, I guess you could say, is that it's often forgotten about. So just here to create a conversation. Send me any questions, any comments that you have in an email. I'm glad to give you any recommendations, and I'll post that right at the end. So yeah, here we go. Who here likes feet? Nobody really, right? We oftentimes try to cover them up. We're always wearing shoes. A lot of people don't even like looking at their feet in general. Yeah, a little different topic, but I want to tell you guys a little bit more about how I got into learning a little bit about foot health, and how, why I'm starting to educate a little bit more about this. I have been an athlete, most of my life. Majority of those years were spent doing gymnastics, which is a barefoot sport. Something that I didn't really think about until, recently, but there's a lot of hours that I spent being barefoot, working on my foot. And when I stopped gymnastics in college, I didn't realize the effects that it was going to have on my body. Part of it being the start of plantar fasciitis in my foot. It started during my senior internship. I had moved into a cardiac rehab center, which was the bottom floor of a hospital. It was a concrete floor. I was starting to wear dress shoes and wear, business casual clothing. So the foot pain kind of started to develop then. And about 3 years ago, I started dancing tango. So I was wearing heels, dancing in heels, mind you. So there's a lot of pivoting and twisting on the ball of my foot. And I also started playing kickball. So I was wearing, narrow cleats once or twice a week. So the pain kind of came and went. About 2 years ago, the plantar fasciitis came back, but it came back with vengeance, even stronger than it was in the first place. And I waited until the pain got really, really bad, and I went to see an orthopedic specialist, where he took some x-rays, and he found a neuroma, which is pretty much when your nerve is compressed due to restriction, and so he gave me a cortisone shot. I put heel lifts in my shoes, so I was wearing these little cups that some of you may have received before, and I would transfer them into my my gym shoes and my regular shoes at Joint Effort. And he recommended more supportive shoes for me, and so I went out to Sound Runner in Brantford, and I got a new pair of shoes, and my feet felt really good for a couple weeks, and then the pain started to come back. So I started researching why my feet were still in pain, even though, I had a cortisone injection. I was doing, all the work that I thought I was supposed to be doing, stretching my calves, and so I learned a little bit more from Katie Bowman, who's a biomechanist, from Dr. Courtney Conley, who is a chiropractor in Colorado, I believe, and she goes by Gait Happens on Instagram. And I stumbled upon this company called the Foot Collective, which is a health education company. And I learned a little bit more of a more natural way to strengthen my feet, and preventative measures that I can take to keep them strong, keep them healthy. And I went to a seminar, and then I applied to be in the Foot Nerd program, so I can start sharing this information about our health, starting at the foot, but overall body health. And now my feet are strong and happy. And I think you may not be able to read my PowerPoint. All right, should be okay there. All right, so starting to talk about the foot. It's the primary way that our body connects to the ground. It's what we stand on, it's how we walk, it's how we move, it's how we jump. So we can kind of refer to our foot as the foundation of our body. And if you think of a foundation and like a house, the stronger your foundation is, the stronger the house is going to be above it. If the foundation is weak and starts to fall apart, then everything above it will do so as well. So we can kind of look at the foot in that sense. And Da Vinci said that the foot is a masterpiece of engineering and a work of art. And it really is if you understand how the foot works. It's very complex, and it has two roles that are kind of polar opposites in a way. We have the ability for it to be a mobile adapter, so to move and kind of take shape around whatever surface we're walking on, whether it be concrete or grass or rocks. It absorbs those ground reaction forces, and then it becomes a rigid lever to propel us forward, and it's how kind of we walk. So it's very complex, and we're in an era of foot dysfunction right now. Most people don't know that we have dysfunctional feet, but we have this inability to organize our foot, the musculature and the bones, to be structurally stable. So the primary goal is to relay information from our foot to the brain, so we can kind of control how we move, and we need the right muscles to fire at the right time in order to walk efficiently. So a lot of dysfunction can happen when the muscles fire at incorrect times, or maybe they're not awake, we can say, neurologically active. So pretty important here. And so just like our feet are sensors, pretty much, right? That senses where we are in the ground. And the more sensory input we have, it allows us to move better, move more optimally. So the more stimulation we get, the more aware our body is of where we are in space, so we have better control over our movement and therefore can move better. We have a few different types of nerves in the plantar, the bottom surface of our foot, that sense pressure, they sense vibration, they sense light, they sense stretch. So it's important that we're getting all these different types of stimulation in order for our nervous system to function optimally. And if you look in this this picture here with the foot, you can see how neural input starts at the bottom. It goes to our central, our spinal cord, I'm sorry, and then that goes up to the brain, so then it comes right back down to those muscles in order to show us how to move. And we can see that the nerves go all the way into the tips of the toes. So that's our feet. There are 4 different layers of muscle in the foot, and they're there for a reason. They're there for movement of the toes and the feet in order to achieve balance, control, stability. Just like we have a central abdominal core, right? We all want good core strength. Our foot is also a core, or we can call our foot a core, or it has a core, actually. And that helps hold the arch in place and support the arch when we're weight bearing, when we're walking around, loading it in any type of way. The muscles help the foot from collapsing, and it also helps the foot become rigid and stiff in order to, in order for us to walk. So when these muscles aren't functioning properly, our foundation becomes unstable. It can cause misalignment in not only the foot, but up into the knee and the hip and the low back. Causes some abnormal movement, which isn't good. So over 100 muscles, which is a lot in the foot. We have a couple different arches in our foot. The 3 main ones are this transverse arch, this medial longitudinal arch, and this lateral longitudinal arch. So arches are very important. They're very structurally sound. That's why most bridges are created with with arches, or actually all bridges are created with arches, because the load comes from the top and then it disperses out to the sides, so it evenly will distribute the load that's on the top to the bottom, so everything's nice and stable. The arches of our foot, they occur when we put load on the foot. It's caused by the bones being aligned in the right way and muscles supporting them. So if the muscles are weak, they can't hold up the arch, and the other tissues have to do some overtime work in allowing our bodies to function the way that they're supposed to. So they end up taking on a lot of load that we don't like. The arch height can vary from person to person. We all have them, whether it be a small arch or a large arch. It's kind of on a continuum, but they're pretty very stable, and few things can happen when our arches don't have the support that they need. And I'll go into plantar fasciitis in a little bit. Right, so it is very hard to talk about the foot and how the foot works if I don't talk about the hip. So our hip is a ball and socket joint in the center of our body, and it has I like to say a large library of movement, where the hip moves in a lot of different directions. So we have our hip, I'll show you. We have our hip flexion, we have our hip extension, we have abduction, we have adduction. We also have internal and external rotation there at the hip. And so if our hip is not able to move the way it's supposed to, it can cause problems upstream into the low back, but also downstream in the knee and the foot. And I believe George is giving me a call right now, so I'm gonna, excuse me 1 second. So when our hips are not mobile, they also cannot be stable in any way. So if our hips aren't stable, then our ankles and our foot can't be stable as well. So we need to spend a little bit of time balancing out the positions that we put our foot in, that we sit in, with daily mobility practice. Our bodies get very used to positions that you put it in frequently. So if we're always moving the same way, our body gets very good at moving that way. So when we sit in a chair, our hips get used to sitting in that 90-degree angle. So it's going to be a little bit harder to get deeper into certain movements because our bodies kind of don't know that we can get there, right? So if we're always sitting to 90 degrees, which is here, your body's not going to know that it can flex up to 120 degrees. So it's very important that we spend a little bit of time opening up the front of the hip. Here I have a picture of a woman doing a hip flexor stretch, which is really good, stretching out the hip flexors, the quads, but also getting into a 90-90 position is very good too. So that's that internal and external rotation of the hip. So moving your hips in all the directions that it can possibly go in is going to be beneficial in a lot of ways. All right, so that is a lot of foot anatomy. What sense does it make to all of you? So knowing how your foot and your hip are supposed to function allows us the ability to start to change how we move, right? If you know that your ankle is supposed to bend, it's supposed to dorsiflex a certain amount, plantar flex a certain amount, and it can't dorsiflex, we can then work at being able to bend the ankle, at moving the hips in certain ways. So this will lead into overall body health. So working on hip health works on foot health, and it's a good way to get yourself out of pain. So we want to be as proactive as you can with this, starting yesterday, right, is the best time to start. But once you start knowing the information and you start taking steps now, going into the future is going to be pretty beneficial. So I spend a few minutes a day, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, just incorporating some healthy foot movements. I roll out with a lacrosse ball. I play with my my toe spreaders, and I'll show you guys those in a little bit and how you can use them. And changing your footwear is also a big thing that you can start doing, and that's going to be a major change, so it's something that you want to transition into, but that's one way that's going to immensely change how our body functions. But the big change that we see in all of this stuff with working on our hips and our calves and our feet is going to be in our balance or balance improvements and our fall reduction risk. According to the CDC, 1 in 3 older adults over the age of 65 fall every year, and 3 million people are treated for those injuries that can happen in the emergency room. So not only are you falling, but there's the potential to have other injuries happen with the fall, broken shoulder, broken wrist, broken arm, whatever it may be. And there's a lot of research on different risk factors that would make someone more prone to falling. So the ones that I want to kind of touch on a little bit are difficulties with walking and balance, lower body weakness, and foot pain or poor footwear. So a lot of the falls happen when we are walking or when we're moving. So if we can correct or improve the way that we walk, we'll see a reduction in falls. And we can work on aligning the lower extremities or the lower body in a certain way that's going to lead to our hips and our core being a lot more stable than they are right now. So what happens to our feet when we age? So just like everything else in the body, our feet go through a lot of different changes as we age. The muscles atrophy, arthritis develops, our feet become a little bit more sensitive due to our skin is thinning, we lose our fat pads under our feet and under the ball of the foot. And all these little changes are going to change the way that we move in general. The shape of our feet also change. If you look back at that last slide, and I had the picture of the baby feet, which I love because they look so perfect and so splayed. There's a lot of room there in the toes. And our feet become more pointed over time. They begin to look a lot like our shoes, right? So the footwear that we put on our feet is a huge factor in that, in how our feet change shape. So the first thing that I want to touch on is muscle atrophy and sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass and muscle tissue with age, which happens naturally. In the first slide, I don't think I mentioned, but there is 26 bones in the foot. There's 33 joints. There's over 100 muscles and tendons, and all of these are there to provide support, balance, and mobility throughout the foot. And if these muscles aren't strong, or if they're not activated frequently, if we're not giving them that neural stimulation or that input in order to move well, they're going to lose their strength, which means that the joints aren't going to move very well. And we can also lose the arch that's developed because of that. So there's two major types of muscles in the foot. We have the intrinsic ones, which are smaller. They start and finish in the foot. And these are the ones that absorb shock and impact forces. And they're going to be the first ones to atrophy. So we want to make sure that we're keeping those nice and strong and healthy, and activating those through some barefoot movements. We have extrinsic muscles that are larger muscles. They are in the foot, but they originate in the lower leg as well. So these ones, the extrinsic muscles, they help to stabilize the ankle joint, but assist the intrinsic muscles in movement. So when our smaller muscles start to atrophy over time, and they lose their strength, your body's going to turn to those bigger muscles to take control of what's not happening with the smaller ones. So they're not really meant to do so. So a lot of calf pain can be caused because of that. And essentially, you're just making your body do more work than it really needs to do, in a sense. So if our muscles can't contract to create the stiffness or that rigidity in the foot that it needs to propel us forward, we'll see a decrease in balance. We'll see a decrease in our proprioception, our motor control. We can see things start to develop in the foot, like hammer toes, which is instead of your toes being straight, they're bent down a little bit. And I'll go a little bit later into how little things that we can do to start correcting those. But plantar fasciitis can also be developed because of the weakness in the musculature. And arthritis. 54 million people in the United States have arthritis. For almost 50% are over the age of 65. And the most common arthritis type that we see is osteoarthritis. Of course, there's rheumatoid arthritis. There's a lot of different types. But arthritis can kind of develop when there's no movement in the joints. Inflammation happens, that's pain. Joints will become stiff if they don't move. So this will lead to some loss of cushioning. So around our joints we have these fluid capsules. If you think of your back and having those discs that are in between all the joints in your spine, that cushion is there for them to move properly. And so we'll lose this cushion over time. And so that's going to lead to, some dysfunction in the foot, some difficulty walking. Our bodies, if it can't move the way that it's supposed to, it's going to find a way to get the work done. So we'll just see some changes in how we walk. And even if you don't have severe or painful arthritis, it's still important to be strengthening the foot so that the arthritis doesn't form in the first place. So space and movement in the joints. There's a couple different things that you can use. I personally love using a lacrosse ball. This is really good to get into all the joints in the foot, and I'll show you a couple different movements. You can also use a golf ball, which is a little bit harder on the foot than a lacrosse ball, but you can try it out. There's also Rad Rollers is one brand that is pretty popular. But I'll take this lacrosse ball, you can find one anywhere, and I'll just start with small movements forward, backward with the lacrosse ball. I'll plant my foot and I'll move it side to side to get right underneath the ball of the foot. And you can do the same thing with your golf ball. And essentially it's just moving around or mobilizing all those joints, keeping them nice and healthy, and creating space. So like baby's feet, which are widest at the toes, which is how our foot is supposed to look, we can kind of regain that that splay, that natural splay that we're supposed to have by spreading the toes. So there's a couple different brands. These ones that I have here are yoga toes. You can find these on Amazon. They're pretty flexible. These are the ones that we have in the Foot Collective. They're made out of silicone, so you just slip these in between your toes, and it just, will help realign them back to the way that they're supposed to be. Splaying is also really good if you have bunions, because that's essentially your big toe is coming into the body. So that's how that bunion is being formed there on the outside. So by straightening out that big toe, that's one way that we can start to do a little bit of work to fix those bunions that we have. So connective tissue and peripheral nerve changes. So when we walk, there's about 1 to 1.5 times our body weight in impact forces that are being put, through the foot and then up into the hip and low back, which is a lot. It's even more impactful when we start to jog or to run or to sprint or jump. So when we receive this energy in through, or when we receive the force in through our heel, it's stored in our connective tissue, and we can kind of think of it similar to a rubber band, right? So a rubber band stretches and then it contracts. So our body uses our connective tissue to store energy and then to release it to propel us forward. So our connective tissue is going to be our fascia and our tendons, which covers everything essentially in the body. All of our muscles, all of our organs are surrounded by connective tissue. So as we age, this tissue is going to lose some elasticity and stiffness, and it can become a little bit stickier. So it's important that we maintain good collagen health and make sure that the tissue is moving very well. Two things that happen with changes in connective tissue can be plantar fasciitis, which I'll go into the next slide, and Achilles tendinosis, which is a more chronic form of tendinitis, essentially that inflammation of the tendon, just because it's taking on more load than it's supposed to do in the first place. And when we look at nerve changes, I'm excited to listen to another exercise physiologist that we have with us in joint effort. Dave is presenting next Thursday on some neural training, so I'm excited about that. But we have these mechanoreceptors in our feet. They begin to degrade as we get older and lose density. So they're not going to send signals to our brain as quickly as they should. So it's going to slow down our reaction time when we do things. So think about falling, and it's a little bit of a delayed response. So it's important that we also work on our nerve speed through some power training. Those foot fires that you see us do during those balance classes are all to kind of train those fast twitch fibers to contract pretty rapidly. And peripheral neuropathy is a sensory issue. It's not a motor issue. So we're going to lose some of that sensation in our feet, but we can still work on improving our muscular strength, even though you can't feel your feet themselves. So people who have multiple sclerosis, or Parkinson's disease, or peripheral neuropathy, where you can't feel your feet, you guys are going to benefit a lot from nerve training, nerve stimulation, and vibration therapy, which we don't do too much work when it comes to vibration, but it's pretty important. There's something called Naboso insoles, which a lot of people have huge success. They're created by Dr. Emily Splickle, who's a functional podiatrist in New York. And Naboso are these insoles where they help stimulate the nerves on the bottom of your feet, and you can just slip them into your regular shoes. And a lot of people have seen good function over time with using some of those. And plantar fasciitis, kind of how I got started learning about all this. So it's a very common issue. A lot of people struggle with plantar fasciitis at some point in their lives. But it's pretty much caused by a lack of support in the skeletal muscles. And when those muscles aren't strong, it's going to rely on other tissues to support it. So the muscles, and you have that underlying fascia that you'll see here. So when your muscles aren't strong, it's going to rely on this fascia to do the things that your foot is supposed to do. And that's not good, because that connective tissue isn't supposed to be supporting that much load. So it's going to develop some irritation. You'll usually find that they're under the base of the heel. And we can work on improving the pain from plantar fasciitis by strengthening the foot, so then that tissue isn't working overtime in order to, support your body. Mobilizing the foot with rolling out with some type of ball. Stretching your calves is going to be important for this too, because I'll go into a little bit with the heeled shoes in a little bit, but when your heel is elevated, it's going to pull on that fascia underneath your foot, and so that's also going to lead to some irritation and maybe some micro tears, which is not good at all. Doing some hip work as well. Like I said, the hip controls the foot, so doing some work there is going to give you some improvements in that plantar fasciitis pain. We also have some changes when it comes to our skin and our fat. So our skin thins over time, which is going to make it a little bit more susceptible to breaking, which of course will lead to inflammation there as well. And the thinning of the skin will also increase the foot sensitivity. Atrophy of the fat pads also will make the foot a little bit more sensitive. You can see here of a healthy fat pad under the foot. We've got a good one underneath the heel, the ball of the foot, and the toes. And over time, we start to see a dissipation of that fat layer. So it's going to cause some irritation in those spots in the foot, which is going to make walking barefoot difficult. So definitely talk to your podiatrist or your doctor about doing certain things that you don't think is going to be good for your foot. Things that I'm talking about here may not be beneficial for you, but it may be beneficial for other people. There is something that we can use to support the foot when that fat pad starts to atrophy. It's a little cup. I don't remember the name of it right now, but it pretty much just pushes the fat a little bit more under the heel, so that's going to relieve some of that pain. And we'll also see some changes when it comes to circulation in the body. If we don't have good space through the foot, we're not going to have good blood flow through the foot. So we'll see more of a sensitivity when it comes to temperature. We'll see possibly an increase in your blood pressure because the blood vessels are more narrow. And this will also lead to your feet being cold, which a lot of people don't like because then you can't feel them, right? So again, creating space in the foot will help with some circulation issues. There's a lot of benefits when it comes to training barefoot. We'll have better control of how your foot is positioned and how forceful your foot is when it impacts the ground. So I wear minimalist shoes pretty much full time now. I know a few women in our Guilford location have switched over to minimalist shoes in the balance class, and you can tell that we interact with the ground a little bit differently. So we're going to be a little bit more softer when our foot hits the ground. We're more aware of how we strike the ground, because in a minimalist shoe you're not going to have a lot of cushion under your foot that will allow you to hit that ground a little bit harder. We'll see improvements when it comes to balance, proprioception, or body awareness. Our foot will move a lot better by training barefoot. We'll have better range of motion, more stability. We'll have stronger leg muscles as well. I know I talk a lot about the foot itself, but strengthening your legs in general, or your lower body in general, will help when it comes to balance, doing your leg presses, doing your squats and your lunges, things like that. But barefoot training will also lead to more core strength. We have something called foot to core sequencing, where you can actually, your foot and your abdominal core are on the same fascial line. So we can get good core strength just by being barefoot. And I want to say, for all of you who have been given at-home programs with us, or who are watching along at our videos, we are inside. So this is the perfect time to try one of your workouts or some of your exercises barefoot if you're interested in, you know, strengthening your feet. It's the perfect time. We're not going outside very much, so why not get it in now? And we're unknowingly really causing damage to our feet. I didn't know about the changes that happen with our foot with our shoe wear. We just, you know, from birth, shoes are put on our feet, and then we go to the store every once in a while. We buy a new pair of shoes every year, and we just buy them because that's what we have to put on our feet, right? We have to use them for protection. But they change the shape of our foot a little bit. If you look here, I have a picture of a normal wide foot and the outline of a narrow shoe that it's going to be put into. And you can see this second foot is how a lot of our feet are, right? Where we're going to have that big toe start to go in. And then eventually it'll lead to something like this where we have more hammer toes, or toes are crossing over the other. It's really based on how shoes are made, right? If you look here at this foot, you can see that it's kind of widest, or it should be widest at the toes. But when we go to get our feet measured for a new pair of shoes, they measure your foot width from under the big toe to under the pinky toe, which actually shouldn't be the widest part of our foot. So that system with the Foot Collective, we're trying to change a way that shoes are being sized. But you can see here in this one too, these are nice baby feet. You can see the nice wide splay in the toes, how this is the widest part. Put your feet into shoes like this over years and years, and our feet end up becoming shaped like our shoes if we were to put them out in front of us. So this is all knowledge that we don't know that we're doing. So the footwear, there's a couple different things that cause our feet pain and dysfunction and things like that. The first one's going to be a positive heel lift. So having a heel in your shoe, a narrow toe box, a bottom that is rigid, so your foot can't function the way that it should, and cushion, which is not the best thing. So changing what we put on our feet is going to help to strengthen not only the foot muscles, but the muscles in the lower leg and lower and upper leg. It gives the toes room to breathe. So if I don't have to sit home and do my toe splaying exercises, I could just, you know, wear a pair of shoes throughout the day that help my toes splay. But pretty much it allows your feet to function how the foot should. So most shoes will have some degree of incline in them, and I test you to go take out a couple pairs of your shoes and test it. If you look at even here, this is a regular running shoe I used to wear all the time actually, and you can see how the top part is heeled and it kind of goes down. Most shoes are like this. Dress shoes have a heel. A lot of women for their careers wear high-heeled shoes all the time. So that's going to elevate the heel above the forefoot, and it's going to change the way that our body is positioned overall. So instead of interacting with the ground perpendicularly, you know, our foot is flat, we're straight up, a heel lift is going to cause our body to shift. So we're going to end up leaning on an incline, but of course our bodies aren't going to allow us to do that. We like to make all these little changes, right, to stay upright. So there's going to be a little bend in the knees. We're going to push the hips back. We're going to thrust the ribs forward. We're going to kind of do some movements there with the head. So by just having a heel lifted, we'll see all these little changes, you know, all these compensations, I guess, that you'll see through the body. The heel will also shorten the calf. So like I said, with the plantar fasciitis, it's going to pull up on that heel bone. So that's going to help irritate that fascia underneath the foot. We're going to have more weight on the ball of our foot when our feet are in heeled shoes. So instead of the load being distributed back here, 50-50, with the degree, we'll have more you know, 70-30, something like that. And every degree that the heel goes up, there's going to be even more pressure there on the front of the foot. The heel lift was also going to strain the arch, like I mentioned, and it's also going to reduce our body's ability to absorb shock. And so if we can't absorb the shock well, we can't use that spring ability, right? That mobile adapter to the rigid lever to propel us forward. So we're going to lose those spring capabilities in the foot as well. So a narrow toe box. Majority of shoes are made this way. If you can see here, I love this picture from Nick. He runs the Foot Collective. Essentially what he did with his foot here was show you the difference in what being barefoot does for your foot, and then he used rubber bands like a shoe to see how that shoe is going to restrict the space in your forefoot. So it's going to push that big toe forward, so that's how that bunion is going to be formed. Our pinky toe, because on both sides, right, our pinky toe is going to start to curve under, and you can kind of see this here. It's going to curve under, and these narrow toe boxes are going to lead to bunions being formed, hammer toes, neuromas like what I had, plantar fasciitis, and because of hammer toes, you know, we'll get corns and calluses developed from the friction of our foot rubbing against the shoe at certain spots. So wide toe box allows the toes to move and splay. Something like, you know, this is a much wider toe box than, got this shoe here, which is pretty narrow. This is a normal shoe, my roommate's shoe. But a wider toe box is going to help encourage that blood flow in through the bottom of the foot. It's going to allow for proper nerve function, and we're pretty much just going to have a wider base of support, right? When I teach balance class, I say all the time that, well, I like to shorten your base of support, right? Because if we're grounded, we're somewhere wide, we're going to be better better able to balance. So if we can shorten that base of support and get good at controlling our bodies in a small environment, that's going to be better for us overall. So a wide toe box allows the toes to splay, and think of it as like real estate, right? Splay the toes, you've got way more real estate here than you do with your toes together. I would choose balancing on something like this versus balancing on something a lot smaller. So toe spreaders are going to work in order to kind of correct that splay too. Sole rigidity. So most soles are going to be, or most shoes are going to have a rigid sole. So if I look back at this shoe, I can't bend this really at all. Got another one here, and this doesn't move at all. So this is going to hinder the ability of the foot to propel us forward. And we're also not going to have that tactile sensation of the ground that's going to allow us, that's going to give us information about where we are. And I really like this photo here, which shows you the differences, or a little difference, in how your foot steps or walks with a shoe on and barefoot. So you can see that even this initial heel strike is going to be a lot different with a shoe on. You can see that you're interacting directly with the heel at a pretty sharp angle, whereas walking barefoot allows you to land a little bit softer on the heel. Your knees are going to be a little bit bent instead of straight. And once you get to a full foot, or a full step, we're not going to have the ability to push off of our big toe like we should. I haven't mentioned big toe mobility a lot in this, but it's super important when it comes to walking. If your big toe doesn't have a good ability to bend, then it's going to limit some of the movement in the hip, which is going to change the way that we walk too. So you miss this whole last part of your gait cycle by wearing a shoe. We don't get that at all. So it just prevents us from fully pushing off. So your legs are going to have to do a lot more work than the foot is supposed to. So creates stiff feet, or the rigid sole will help create a stiff foot, and that stiff foot is going to lead to a weaker foot. Cushion soles, so most shoes have a lot of cushion in them, especially as we start to get a little bit older and we may wear more orthopedic style shoes. They're going to have a large amount of cushion in it like this. Our running shoes, large amount of cushion. So we're not going to get that feedback from the ground because we can't feel the ground. So we're going to end up interacting with it a lot harder than we should be. So that's going to add a lot more force in through the lower body. So we don't have that ability to naturally buffer those forces. Let me show you. So this is a shoe that I wear all the time. It's I guess a more natural or minimalist shoe. So it doesn't have any cushion in the sole. You can see that it's flat, but it also has the ability to bend. So this is something that we kind of look for, or we'd like to look for in a shoe, is some type of ability to move. Even our training sneakers, something like this, if you bend it, it's pretty much only going to bend at one spot. And as you can see, that's going to be right underneath the ball of the foot, which, if we're looking back at this toe-off phase of our gait cycle, the toes should bend, not the ball of the foot. So this is just going to restrict some of that movement too. Right. So yeah, things to look for: wider forefoot, so your toes have some room to splay. We want it to be flat or zero drop, something like this. So it's not going to cause our foot to be in a more plantar flex position or cause rigidity there in the ankle, or issues in the calf. A thin sole, this is super thin, so when I walk on the ground and I step on a rock, I kind of feel the rock. I'm used to it by now. It's kind of nice sometimes, but we want something that has a thin sole, because we don't really need the cushioning. Of course, we all have different feet, so you may have to take some different steps in transitioning to a more minimalist shoe. It's going to take a long time to do so. And we also want something that has a pretty flexible construction, so our foot is able, our joints are able to articulate in all the ways that it's supposed to. So we get a full range of motion. And even finding a shoe with just 2 of the 4 is going to be a pretty good place to start, or 1. Find a flat heel first, then go to less cushion, something a little bit more flexible. So healthy foot maintenance tips. So a lot of this work can be done in 10 minutes, in the morning, later at night, throughout the day. So you don't have to change your whole lifestyle completely to start seeing some benefits. So the first thing would be rolling out your foot with lacrosse ball. 2 minutes per day per foot, combination of forward, backward movements, side to side movements, just to stimulate the nerves and move the joints in the foot. And there's been studies that show that rolling out your foot with a lacrosse ball for 5 minutes is going to cause an immediate improvement in your balance. So for all of you who take balance class, and it may be a good idea to spend a couple minutes before you start just rolling out your feet, and then get right into the workout. Second thing would be to create some space. Using toe spreaders, using yoga toes, whatever it may be. There's something called a hand-foot shake that we can do, which essentially is putting your hand in the toes of your foot and then moving your foot around that way. And if you'd like to see a video on that, that doesn't require you to get anything. It may be a struggle for some, but I can always send you that video. One of our members in Guilford, I remember, I was talking to her about toe splaying, and how her nail technician that she went to every week to get her nails done noticed when she had started doing a little bit more work to open up her foot, because the technician was able to put in the spreaders or the tissue in between her toes a lot easier than she had been able to before. So that's a good thing. And third thing to do, a couple basic movements to start moving the toes. Strengthen the muscles of the feet. I can give you a little bit more information about that, but a good one to start with would just be, can you lift your big toe off the ground? On one side, can you lift it on both? Can you plant the big toe down and lift all the rest of the four toes? So some little movements, calf raises are pretty good. Something called short foot is a way to contract and to strengthen the core of that foot. And just daily balance and mobility work is going to be good to improve motion in through the hips and through the foot. So a lot of these things, or some of these things, I actually like to stack on top of things that I already do. So something like rolling out my foot. I think a lot of times when I'm doing my hair, surprisingly, I can kind of stand on one leg and roll out my foot with the ball as I'm like, putting all my product in through my hair. I tell people you can do it while you're brushing your teeth. You can splay your toes as you sit on the couch and watch TV, to be honest. So we can kind of stack these little tricks on top of things that we already do. So we're not adding in, a big drastic change in our lifestyle. Transitioning to minimalist shoes, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I think first starting to strengthen the foot at home is going to be the best thing to start doing before you go a little bit more extreme into a minimalist shoe. But it should not be an all or none approach. When I first got these are Vivo Barefoot shoes. When I first got these, I put them on for about maybe an hour, and then my feet were starting to hurt. So I knew that I was able to gradually increase the amount of time that I spent in them when my feet started hurting less, because your legs are going to be doing, or your musculature is going to be doing a lot more work in a minimalist shoe, because it doesn't have that cushion, it doesn't have that rigid sole, so you have to actually push off with the toes. So you definitely want to go a lot slower with this, and you don't want to, I say let's all learn from George, who bought a pair of these Vibram 5 fingers. I'm sure that all of you have seen something like this, but these are the toe shoes, and which is kind of how a shoe should be designed if we think of our hands and the gloves, right? We wear gloves. On our hands we have all of our individual fingers that allow for good movement. We can pick things up. We rarely wear mittens, right? On a daily basis, we're more likely to grab gloves. We just can't do as much with mittens. So if we think of our feet the same way, why is our shoe a mitten and not a glove? But George went out and bought a pair of these, which are good for strengthening the foot, but not to go run a 5K right afterwards. You can ask him all about it. He was in a lot of pain afterwards, and threw the shoes out, and it must have been about a week or so that he really struggled with, how his walking in general, just because he wasn't used to that exposure. So first thing we should start doing is just spending a little bit of time barefoot around the house, if you don't do so already. If you're someone who is always wearing shoes or always wearing socks, then start spending 10-30 minutes a day just walking around the house. If you're doing your dishes, if you're vacuuming, good time to not have anything on your feet. Start incorporating some foot restoration. 5-10 minutes a day. That's going to be the lacrosse ball, it's going to be the toe splaying. Start looking for shoes. So say you have a boot like this and you wear this every day, and this is about 2 inches or so. Going from something like this heel height, to no height, or to a flat zero drop heel, is really going to bother your foot, just because your foot's not used to being in certain positions, and it may not even have the mobility to do so. So definitely start by dropping down your heel height. That would be a good place to start. And if you are going to do a shoe like this, start with an hour, start with 30 minutes just walking around, and then gradually increase your time. I think it took me a good maybe 6 months in order to wear these minimalist shoes full time. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some discomfort, some pain in the foot, but just make sure that you're taking steps to work on this that kind of relates to your own body. If your feet are in a lot of pain, may not be the best place for you to start. So just listen to your body, see how it's feeling. You know, ask me about any questions. Talk to your doctor, your podiatrist. That's that. And I love this photo of, this is kind of society in a way, right? Where everyone's wearing shoes. And this is saying, you know, start taking some strides to, you know, take your shoes off and then go down a different path. Two roads diverge by a yellow wood, right? What path should you go down? One is a little bit better for the way that your foot functions than the other. So, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. There's a lot more information that I have about this. So it's Brittany at jointeffortexercise.com. Yeah, I hope you guys learned a little something. Send me any emails. You can even comment on this below, and I'll get back to you. But thank you everyone for listening about my feet talk, which people say that I'm a little obsessed with them, but I'm not. I just think it's some really great information for us all to have. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.